On a cold Christmas night, a forgotten elderly woman sat alone beneath the glowing tree while snow swallowed the world around her. A German shepherd appeared from the darkness, carrying a small bag of bread gently in his mouth. Far behind him stood a retired Marine, watching with the quiet ache of someone who's lost more than he's ever said. The woman's frail hands rested on her knees, trembling from a loneliness deeper than winter. When the dog pressed his head to her leg, her grief finally surfaced in a silent break. That tiny moment pulled the Marine forward, as if fate itself insisted he step in.
It's all right.
Where are you watching from tonight? If this moment touches your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Snow fell, the way quiet thoughts drift through a tired mind, soft, unhurried, weightless, yet heavy with memory. It blanketed the small northern town of North Falls, a place tucked between rolling pine ridges and a frozen river that glimmered like a blade under moonlight. Christmas lights hung from vintage brick storefronts, trembling gently in the cold breeze. Families hurried along the main street, scarves fluttering, children laughing, bells ringing from the old church tower perched on the hill above town. The whole place glowed like a Christmas card that time had forgotten. But not everyone felt the warmth that shimmered in the windows. Rowan Mercer, 55 years old, walked with the deliberate calm of someone who had learned long ago to hide pain inside the rhythm of his footsteps. He was tall, around 1.85 meters, with wide shoulders and a body that still held the disciplined strength of a man forged in military life. His dark brown hair, trimmed in a clean undercut, contrasted with the faint silver at the temples, a quiet reminder of years spent under foreign suns and heavier skies. His face was angular, the kind sculpted by hardships rather than vanity, the jaw firm, the expression spare. He never wore a beard. He preferred clarity, both in vision and in how others saw him. His eyes, that unmistakable blue-gray, carried the solemn calm of an ocean that had weathered storms without letting anyone drown in it. People in town often said Rowan didn't speak unless it mattered, and when he did, he chose words as if they were rations. He limped slightly, nothing dramatic, just the subtle falter of a man whose right leg had once taken shrapnel during a night raid halfway across the world. It made stairs difficult on cold mornings and made memories difficult on every other day. Beside him strode Blaze, his 5-year-old German shepherd, muscular and broad-chested, weighing nearly 40 kilos. Blaze's coat was a deep black and tan, darker along the back, with a long, pale scar running from the left shoulder down to the ribs. A reminder of an operation that neither of them fully walked away from. His left forepaw pressed into the snow with a faint hesitation. An old fracture had healed, but not without leaving its whisper behind. Blaze's amber eyes were sharp but soulful, the kind that made people believe dogs understood more than they let on. The two of them looked out of place among the cheerful crowds. Rowan in his Marpat camo uniform, boots worn but cared for, utility belt neatly organized, and Blaze with his plain collar, the only remaining piece of his old K9 gear, a charred fragment Rowan kept tucked away like a relic of something they survived together. They had been alone for a long time. Not lonely, just alone in the way a house can stand strong, yet hollow. As they moved through the street, children pointed at Blaze, and adults offered small nods of acknowledgement. Rowan was known here, a quiet resident of the cabin, near Pine Ridge, a man who helped repair roofs after storms, who split wood for elders without being asked. A man of few words but dependable presence. A man with a past no one fully understood. He paused at the bakery window. A family gathered inside, 3 generations around hot pies and cocoa. A grandfather helped a toddler place a paper star on a tiny tabletop tree. Rowan watched, expression unreadable. Blaze nudged his knee. Rowan blinked, exhaled slowly, then said softly, "Yeah, I know. Let's keep moving." They walked toward the church hill, navigating through the crowd heading to midnight service. Rowan hadn't planned to attend. He rarely did. Faith was complicated when you'd seen what he had seen. But Blaze tugged the leash toward the old stone steps leading up the hill, pulling insistently. "Not that way," Rowan murmured. Blaze pulled harder. Rowan frowned. Blaze was disciplined. He never pulled unless there was a reason. A real reason. "All right," Rowan said quietly. "Lead the way." They climbed the hill as the church bells chimed once, twice, 3 times, echoing against the white expanse of the valley. The snow thickened, muffling the world. At the top, the old church glowed with golden windows. People streamed inside, brushing snow from their coats. But Blaze didn't stop at the church door. He continued past it, heading toward a lonely stone bench positioned at the cliff edge where the town's Christmas lights spread out below, like trembling stars. And then Rowan saw her. Re-hook moment. A strange stillness in the snow. Blaze suddenly lowered himself into a crouch, tail still, ears forward, as if sensing a pain deeper than cold or loneliness. He had reacted this way only a handful of times, once before Rowan found a wounded soldier in the desert dust, once before an avalanche buried a hiker near Wolf's Ridge. Each time, Blaze had been right. Each time, someone's life was about to change. Rowan's breath caught. Something unseen pressed against the night. A feeling like a quiet summons. He followed Blaze's gaze. A woman, elderly, her frame small, almost fragile, sat alone on the bench. Snow had collected softly on the shoulders of her long gray wool coat. Her hair was silver, loosely curled, escaping from an old clip decorated with a worn pearl. Her hands, lined with age and gentle labor, clutched a handkerchief. She dabbed her eyes slowly, as if each tear needed permission to fall. Her name, Rowan would later learn, was Eleanor Hayes. 70+, widowed, once a librarian at North Falls Elementary. A woman who loved stories, who believed every life had a chapter worth saving. Children adored her. Adults respected her. But tonight, she was alone. Utterly, heartbreakingly alone. Rowan approached carefully. His boots sank into the snow with soft crunches. Eleanor didn't react at first, her gaze fixed on the shimmering town below, watching families move like constellations reunited. After a moment, she became aware of Blaze first. Dogs often saw what humans ignored, but humans often sensed the dogs before the men standing behind them. Blaze stepped close, sitting in front of her, head slightly tilted, his eyes gentle, patient. Eleanor blinked, taken aback, then managed a trembling smile. "Well," she whispered, voice thin as frost, "aren't you handsome?" Her tone was warm but heavy, a kindness weighed down by a grief she tried to tuck away politely. Rowan stood a few feet away, unsure if he should intrude. He never wanted to impose on anyone's sorrow. He knew too much about private grief. But Eleanor lifted her head and met his gaze. Her eyes were pale blue, soft, yet exhausted, the eyes of someone who had carried too much alone for too long. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Your dog, he startled me, but he's lovely." Rowan offered a faint nod. "He doesn't mean harm. He's intuitive." "He came to me," she said, voice faltering, "as if he knew." Rowan hesitated. "Sometimes he does." Eleanor let out a breath that steamed in the cold. "Tonight's not my night, I suppose?" Rowan stayed silent, allowing her the space to continue if she wished. "My children," she said finally, almost apologetically. "They said they'd come, but they all canceled. Busy lives." She tried to laugh, but it broke midway. "I thought maybe someone would remember." Rowan felt something shift in him. A memory? His own son, years ago, turning away from him at the airport, anger, confusion, the fracture that neither of them had repaired since. He swallowed. "I'm sorry," was all he could say. Eleanor nodded. It's all right. Happens to people my age. Life gets louder for everyone else. Blaze pressed his head gently against her knee. Eleanor placed a trembling hand on his fur. That's a good boy, she whispered. Rowan watched her shoulders shake, not dramatically, but in the quiet, defeated way of someone trying not to disturb the world with her sadness. He couldn't walk away, not tonight, not with Blaze choosing her, not with the bells ringing hope into the cold air. "Ma'am," Rowan said softly, "you shouldn't be alone out here in this weather." Eleanor looked up again, and for the first time, Rowan saw the depth of loneliness in her eyes. "Would you walk me down the hill?" she asked. Rowan nodded. "Of course." Blaze rose immediately, falling into step beside her with the seriousness of a guardian returning to duty. As they began descending the snowy path, Rowan caught one last glance at the cliffside bench, snow claiming it inch by inch, erasing the trace that someone had sat there with a broken heart. Something told him the night was not done changing things. And he was right. When Blaze positioned himself between Rowan and Eleanor, almost protectively, Rowan realized this Christmas night was not ordinary, and whatever had brought them together was just beginning. Snow traced delicate lines across the old stone bench where Eleanor Hayes sat, the wind threading through her silver hair as if urging her to leave the cold. But she remained still, hands folded neatly over her lap, her soft wool gloves dusted with frost. Her posture was gentle but weary, like a person who had spent a lifetime being careful, with her words, with her hopes, with her disappointments. Her eyes, pale blue and ringed with age, drifted over the lights of North Falls below, blinking as families hurried toward warm dinners and crowded pews. Rowan Mercer stood a short distance from her, Blaze sitting alert at his side. Rowan wasn't sure what to say next. He felt strangely like he had stepped into a moment that wasn't his, a moment meant to dissolve quietly into the night. Yet Blaze had chosen this direction, and Rowan had learned long ago that the dog's instincts often understood brokenness before his own tired heart did. Eleanor cleared her throat softly. "Your dog? Blaze, right? He's got good timing." Her voice trembled with a mix of humor and sorrow, as though the two emotions had always lived close together inside her. Rowan nodded, his breath clouding in the cold. "He doesn't approach just anyone." "Well," she murmured, stroking the top of Blaze's head, "maybe tonight I needed someone who didn't expect anything from me." Blaze leaned into her touch, a rumbling breath vibrating in his chest, a low, comforting sound. Eleanor smiled, a small, cracked smile that still carried warmth, the kind Rowan instinctively respected. "You've been up here long?" he asked gently. "A while," she replied, "long enough to realize the cold is more honest than people." Rowan stayed quiet. Some truths were better gently set down rather than pressed into. Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I raised 3 children," she said, the words falling like tired snow. "I taught them to share, to call home, to show up for those they love." She drew in a shaky breath. "But life taught them something else." "You shouldn't have to spend Christmas alone," Rowan said. "It wasn't the plan," she whispered. "They said they'd come, but—" She hesitated, reaching into her coat pocket for her phone. The screen lit her face with pale blue light. Rowan couldn't help noticing, just for a moment, how small her hands looked wrapped around a device filled with empty promises. A text read, "Sorry, Mom, too busy. Eat something warm. I'll call later." Her shoulders rose, then lowered, not in anger, not even in sadness, but in that quiet resignation of someone who has run out of places inside herself to store disappointment. Eleanor clicked the screen off. "They're good kids," she said softly. "Life just pulls us apart sometimes." Rowan understood that too well. His own son, his only child, had once adored him, a boy who followed him around the house with toy soldiers, who wrote letters when Rowan deployed, who waited at airports with hopeful eyes. But the war changed Rowan, and Rowan changed the world around him without meaning to. Silence grew where trust should have stayed. Eventually, distance became their shared language. Rowan swallowed the memory down, the way he'd learned to swallow everything that hurt. Eleanor wiped her cheek with her gloved hand, embarrassed. "I must look pitiful to you." Rowan shook his head. "Not pitiful. Human." For a moment, they simply breathed the same cold air. Below, the church bells began to ring again, clear, steady notes cutting through the wind. Blaze shifted suddenly, his ears pricking, his posture sharpening. He lifted his nose toward the woods behind them, then toward Eleanor, then back to Rowan. His amber eyes narrowed, intense and searching. Rowan's brows knit. Blaze rarely behaved like this without a reason. Rehook moment. A signal in the cold blaze stepped closer to Eleanor and with slow purpose rested his head firmly against her chest. Not seeking affection, offering comfort. His tail did not wag. His breath was steady. His eyes, however, shimmered with an uncanny alertness, as if he sensed something about her Rowan had not yet seen. Eleanor froze. Rowan inhaled sharply. Blaze only did this with people in real emotional pain, soldiers with flashbacks, grieving spouses, children who had lost someone they loved. He was never wrong. A gust of wind cut through the hilltop. Rowan felt a sudden weight settle between them, a moment that seemed to whisper a truth he hadn't yet learned. Something about Eleanor's loneliness ran deeper than forgotten holiday plans. Something Blaze had understood before either of them had spoken a word. Eleanor brought a trembling hand to Blaze's muzzle. "You're quite the gentleman," she murmured. "Almost like you know everything I'm not saying." Rowan lowered himself to sit beside her on the bench. "He reads hearts better than I do." "That's a rare gift," she whispered. "So is honesty," Rowan said. Eleanor gave a small, grateful laugh. "Do you mind if I tell you something? Something silly, maybe?" "I don't mind." "I came here because the hilltop was where my husband proposed to me," she said. "He used to say this spot has the clearest view of heaven." She paused. "I thought, if I sat here long enough tonight, I might feel close to him. But grief isn't something that comes on command." Rowan nodded slowly. "No, but neither is healing." Eleanor looked at him again. The wind lifted her hair, revealing the deep lines around her eyes, lines carved by years of kindness more than age. "You speak like someone who's lived a long time with ghosts." Rowan didn't deny it. "Blaze and I, we've seen things, lost things." "You don't have to tell me," she said softly. "Some stories are meant to wait." Rowan let her words sit. They settled into him with surprising ease. A family walked past on the path below, the father lifting a giggling toddler to see the church tower. Eleanor watched them with a tenderness wrapped in quiet ache. "My children used to do that," she whispered. "Lift their kids so they'd see the lights. Last year they promised they'd take me to see the parade. I cooked all morning." Her voice thinned. "But schedules changed. Next year," they said. "They shouldn't leave you alone tonight," Rowan replied. "They don't mean harm," Eleanor insisted gently. "Time just runs faster for them." "Still shouldn't happen," he said. She looked at Rowan, really looked, and something eased in her posture. "What about you, Mr. Mercer? Do you have people waiting for you?" Rowan hesitated. "Not anymore." "Oh," Eleanor murmured, a soft thread of sympathy weaving through her tone. "Then perhaps this hill has a strange way of bringing the right souls together." The church bells rang again. Blaze nudged Eleanor, urging her gently to stand. Rowan rose with her. "You shouldn't be alone out here," Rowan said, his voice low but firm. "Not tonight." Eleanor blinked, startled by how warm her chest suddenly felt. I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be." Blaze gave a short, approving huff, as if sealing the agreement himself. For the first time in many years, Eleanor felt someone's offer not out of obligation, but sincerity. And perhaps because the night was too cold, or her heart too tired, she simply nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I won't stay here alone." Rowan extended his arm, not commanding, just offering. Eleanor hesitated, then slipped her small, chilled hand into his. Blaze walked ahead, guiding them down the hill like a sentinel rediscovering purpose. Below them, the lights of North Falls shimmered, bright and hopeful, unaware that on the highest hill above town, 3 lives had just shifted quietly toward one another. Christmas Eve was not yet over, and something Rowan had long thought buried, flickered awake inside him. The road to Rowan Mercer's cabin wound through a quiet corridor of pines, their branches bending under the weight of new snow. The wind hummed low, a sound like distant memory, as Rowan guided Eleanor Hayes down the narrow path. Blaze trotted ahead, ears high, tail sweeping through the powdery white in arcs of excitement. The dog moved with purpose, pausing now and then to look back at them as though ensuring they kept up. His amber eyes reflected the lantern Rowan carried, giving him an almost guardian-like glow. Rowan's cabin emerged from the shadows, small, weathered, and humble, built of thick logs darkened by decades of storms. Soft golden light spilled through the frosted windows, blurring the glass and offering a warmth that felt larger than the building itself. Smoke drifted from the chimney, carrying the faint scent of pine wood and something earthy simmering on the stove. Eleanor paused before entering, her breath catching in the cold air. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though the cabin was hardly more than a single room with a loft above. The beauty, perhaps, came from its simplicity, the kind untouched by disappointment. Rowan opened the door, stepping aside. "Mind the threshold. Blaze thinks he owns it." Blaze huffed as if in agreement and nudged his head under Eleanor's hand before darting inside. The cabin interior glowed with soft lamplight. A stone fireplace crackled steadily, flames licking the logs with orange tongues. The walls held modest shelves, tools, books, jars of dried herbs, and a few framed photographs Rowan kept turned slightly away from direct view. Despite the wilderness chill outside, the cabin felt warm, alive, almost expectant. Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, admiring the space. "You keep a tidy home," Rowan shrugged lightly. "Less to clean that way." Blaze ran to a corner near the woodpile and tugged at a folded wool blanket with his teeth, dragging it toward Eleanor. She blinked in surprise. "Oh my," she laughed softly. "He really does know how to host." "He's been my right hand for years," Rowan said. "Thinks he runs the place." Blaze gave a proud bark and hopped toward the stove, sniffing the pot Rowan had left simmering. Rowan moved to lift the lid, releasing the fragrance of herbs, chicken, and carrots. "It's nothing fancy," he said, "but it'll warm you up." Eleanor touched the edge of her coat, hesitant. "I don't want to trouble." "You're not troubling anyone," Rowan replied, more gently than he intended. He cleared his throat and set out 2 bowls, feeling the awkwardness of someone out of practice with hosting. They settled at the simple wooden table. Blaze curled near Eleanor's chair, tail thumping softly each time she glanced his way. Rowan served soup, steaming, thick, comforting, and pulled out a small loaf of bread from the tin on the counter. It was slightly crooked, the crust uneven, but Eleanor smiled as though it were a feast. "This reminds me of the first Christmas dinner I had with my husband," she said quietly. "In a tiny base housing apartment. We didn't have money, but we had heat and one another." Rowan lifted his gaze. "Your husband was military?" "A Navy man," Eleanor answered, her expression tender at the memory. Tall, dark hair, laughed loudly at things that weren't funny. He served 2 tours overseas, came back quieter, different, but he was a good father, a good man. She paused, fingers lightly circling her spoon. "He passed when our youngest was 10. Heart condition. I raised the children alone after that." Rowan nodded slowly. "That's not easy." "No," she murmured, "but worth every breath." The fire crackled. The cabin felt wrapped in a silence too soft to be empty, one carrying shared understanding instead of loneliness. Rowan watched her face in the glow. The wrinkles around her eyes weren't simply lines of age, but proof of a life that had stretched between hardship and hope. "You loved him deeply," Rowan said. "I still do," Eleanor whispered, almost surprised by her own admission. Blaze shifted then, lifting his head sharply. His ears pricked toward the wall, toward nothing Rowan could hear. The dog stood, stiff-legged, staring into the dimmest corner of the cabin. A low, uncertain rumble vibrated in his chest. "Blaze?" Rowan asked softly. The dog did not move. His pupils widened, amber irises reflecting the flame's flicker. He stepped once toward the shadows, alert, attentive, as if sensing something that lived not in sound, but in the room's unseen ache. Eleanor followed his gaze, her breath trembling. Re-hook moment. The shadow that wasn't there. Blaze approached the corner with slow, deliberate steps. He pressed his nose to the air, then sat down suddenly, shoulders slumping in a strange posture Rowan rarely saw from him, half guarding, half grieving. Eleanor whispered, "What's wrong with him?" Rowan swallowed. "He reacts like that when someone in the room is carrying something heavy. Not physical. Emotional?" Blaze turned his head, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes, and let out a soft, wounded sound, almost a whine. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. Rowan understood in that instant. Blaze had sensed a deeper loneliness in her than she had spoken aloud. Something rooted not only in this Christmas night, but in years, decades, of silent endurance. The corner held no shadow, but the weight Eleanor carried had formed one. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping free, and Blaze moved instantly to place his head in her lap. Eleanor stroked his fur with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the dog, as if apologizing for a burden she could not put down. Rowan looked away, giving her the dignity of a private sorrow, even as she sat inches from him. He understood too well the feeling of carrying grief with no intention of letting it go, because releasing it might mean losing the last thread that tied you to what mattered most. When Eleanor finally lifted her head, she tried to smile. "I didn't realize how tired I was." "Tired isn't weakness," Rowan said. "Sometimes it's just proof that you kept going longer than most would." She looked at him then with a soft respect. "Your son? You mentioned once you had a son?" Rowan hesitated. He rarely spoke of the boy, but Eleanor's empathy was gentle, never intrusive. "We haven't spoken in years," he admitted. "Not since he told me he didn't recognize the man I'd become after the war." Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "Children forget the sacrifices," she said softly, "but they remember the wounds, even the unseen ones." Rowan nodded. Something inside him loosened, though he hadn't realized it was tight. The cabin filled again with the aroma of soup and warm bread. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite with gratitude. She laughed quietly when Blaze tried to rest his paw on her knee, as though requesting a piece of bread. "You're shameless," she teased gently, giving him the crust. Blaze accepted it proudly, tail sweeping the floor like a feather duster. Rowan refilled her bowl. Eleanor watched him, her gaze steady and kind. "You didn't have to take me in," she said. "Most people wouldn't." "Most people forget what kindness looks like," Rowan replied, shrugging. "Doesn't mean we have to." Eleanor exhaled, deeply moved. After dinner, Rowan placed more wood into the fireplace. The room glowed brighter. Outside, snow thickened into silver curtains, cloaking the forest in silence. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair near the fire. Blaze curled at her feet, already drifting into a contented sleep, jaw twitching softly in a dog's dream. Rowan stood nearby, leaning against the table with arms crossed. He wasn't a man who smiled easily, but tonight, watching Eleanor relax into the warmth, something unknotted inside him. "You've given me more comfort in one evening than my own children have in years," Eleanor whispered. "Not because they don't love me, but because life taught them to hurry past things that matter." Rowan nodded. "People forget the elderly don't stop feeling just because the world stops looking." "Exactly," she said softly. Blaze huffed in agreement without even waking. Eleanor's smile grew. "You know, Blaze understands more than most humans." "He does," Rowan said. "He always has." The fire began to settle, embers glowing like small, steady hearts. Eleanor reached for the blanket Blaze had brought her, pulling it over her lap. "Rowan," she murmured, voice slow with warmth and fatigue. "What I needed tonight wasn't shelter. It was humanity." Rowan sat in the chair across from her. "You'll have both here." She closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment settle into her bones. Outside, the Yovji storm intensified, but inside the cabin, the world felt warm, almost whole. And Rowan understood something he hadn't felt in years. Eleanor wasn't a burden. She was a reminder of kindness, of connection, of the simple truth that even the forgotten deserve to be held gently by the world. Tonight was not about charity. It was dignity, returned and accepted. Morning arrived with a brightness that felt almost unreal after the heavy snowfall of the previous night. Sunlight scattered across the white ground like shards of glass, sharp and dazzling. Rowan Mercer stepped outside the cabin with Blaze at his heel, the cold air crisp enough to sting the lungs. Eleanor Hayes followed slowly, clutching the railing, wrapped in Rowan's thick wool scarf because she had stubbornly insisted she didn't need anything more, until Rowan draped it around her shoulders himself. Blaze pulled the leash the moment it was clipped on, not in excitement, in purpose. His ears stood tall, his steps deliberate, muscles working in a steady, urgent rhythm. Rowan narrowed his eyes. "He wants us to go somewhere." Eleanor blinked at the dog. "He can't be serious?" "He's always serious," Rowan muttered. The dog led them through the frost-covered forest path toward the eastern side of North Falls, where the homes were older, proudly worn and shaped by decades of snowfall and quiet living. Eleanor's house came into view, a modest white cottage with green shutters, surrounded by dormant hydrangea bushes bowed under the snow. But something new marred the front yard, a laminated sign, bright and bold. "Property under review. Estate valuation pending." Eleanor stopped walking. Her breath hitched. I didn't sign anything," she whispered. "I didn't even talk to anyone." Rowan scanned the front porch. Fresh footprints, a faint lingering scent of cologne unfamiliar to him. And on the mailbox, a taped letter bearing the logo of a real estate agency. Inside the envelope was a printed notice, preliminary documentation for assisted living transfer. Property evaluation in process. Eleanor's face went pale. "They wouldn't. They told me it was only a suggestion." "Your children did this?" Rowan asked carefully. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes filled with shame, a shame she shouldn't have carried. "They said they're too busy. that living alone like this isn't safe, that selling the house would take weight off their shoulders. Rowan felt a coldness beneath the snow itself. "Without asking you?" "They think they know what's best," she whispered. "And maybe I believed them for too long." Blaze growled, not threateningly but protectively, as he sniffed the sign, then turned toward the house with sudden resolve. He marched to the front door and sat down, staring pointedly. "He wants inside," Rowan said. Eleanor unlocked the door with trembling hands. The cottage interior smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old pine floors. The walls held framed photographs, children at various stages of life, a younger Eleanor beside her husband, a family holiday portrait, long faded. Blaze walked through the home with unusual seriousness. He sniffed corners, paused at doorways, then continued until he reached the small study at the back of the house. There, he sat in front of an antique wooden cabinet, its legs carved with lilies, its varnish worn with age. Rowan approached. "What is it, boy?" Blaze lifted his paw and scratched once, then again, gentle, insistent. Eleanor frowned softly. "Harold always kept this cabinet locked, said it was old, fragile. I never questioned it." Rowan tugged the drawer. It slid open easily, empty except for dust, but Blaze moved his nose lower, to the base. Rowan tapped the wooden floor inside. It sounded hollow. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I think there's something under here." Her breath trembled. Harold was a private man, even with me. Rowan slid his knife under the inner plank and lifted. The wood popped free with a soft groan. Underneath lay a small, sealed tin box and several envelopes yellowed by age. Eleanor pressed a hand to her lips. "Oh, Harold?" Rowan carefully opened the box. Inside were letters, some from overseas, others addressed to "My dearest Ellie." At the very bottom was an envelope separate from the rest, addressed in Harold's steady handwriting. "For Ellie, if ever the truth needs to be known." Her fingers shook as she opened it. A photograph slipped out, a younger Harold standing beside a man in Marine uniform, older, rugged, with the same blue-gray eyes Rowan saw in his own reflection. Eleanor ran her thumb over the edge of the image. This man, Harold said he owed his life to someone he met during deployment, someone named Mercer, but he never told me more. Rowan's stomach tightened. "My grandfather served in the same division. He rescued someone during an inland assault. He didn't talk about it much." "Harold wrote about him," Eleanor said quietly, unfolding the letter. "Said the man saved him when he thought he'd never see home again." Rowan felt something shift inside him. Connection, fate, the kind of quiet intersection of lives that felt bigger than coincidence. Blaze nudged his leg and looked up, as if confirming Rowan's unspoken thought. But the moment shattered when the front door opened hard enough to rattle the frame. A man stepped inside, tall, broad, mid-40s, dressed in a long gray coat and polished shoes. His face was tight, jaw clenched, brows pulled together, not in grief or fear, but irritation. His hair was dark blonde, carefully styled, but his eyes, cold, impatient, had an edge sharpened by years of self-importance. This was Matthew Hayes, Eleanor's eldest child. "Mom, what is going on here?" he demanded. His voice had the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed. "You didn't answer your phone, and why is this man here with you?" Eleanor stepped back, startled. "Matthew, we were just what? Letting strangers into your home?" "Mom, this is exactly why you need supervision." Rowan straightened, calm but firm. "I'm not a stranger. Blaze and I were helping her." "Helping?" Matthew scoffed. "Looks more like you're taking advantage of an old woman who doesn't know what she's doing." Before Rowan could respond, Blaze moved forward, placing himself directly between Rowan and Matthew. His stance widened, chest lifted, tail stiff. Not aggression, but unmistakable warning. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Matthew froze. "Control your dog." "He's controlled," Rowan said coolly, "and he's telling you to calm down." Matthew's face reddened. "My mother is vulnerable, and now I find some ex-military drifter prowling through her house? Do you think people won't talk? Because they already are. Billings, the realtor, said someone suspicious has been hanging around her." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Billings is lying." "Of course you'd say that," Matthew snapped. Eleanor stepped forward, voice trembling. "Matthew, Rowan, and Blaze saved me last night. They took me in. They showed me more kindness than anyone has in a long time." Matthew blinked slowly. "Mom, don't be naive." Blaze let out another guttural sound. "Stop," Eleanor said sharply, sharper than Rowan had ever heard from her. "Matthew, you may not believe me, but listen to your own mother. Rowan hasn't asked for anything. He hasn't taken anything. He's simply been here, present, when none of you were." Matthew's posture faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "Mom." Rowan stepped back slightly, letting her words stand on their own. Eleanor turned to Rowan then, her small hand reaching out to clasp his wrist. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing with me when my own children didn't." Rowan felt the warmth of her grip, the sincerity in her eyes, and Blaze pressed against his leg as if sealing the moment. Outside, the morning light brightened across the snow, quiet, steady, resolute. And inside that little house, long-buried truths had begun to surface. The wind picked up as night settled over North Falls, carrying with it the deep groan of the pines shifting under winter's weight. Rowan Mercer stood on the cabin porch with Blaze pressed against his leg, both watching the sky turn the color of steel. The storm wasn't dangerous, just restless, like a warning whispered through branches. Inside, the fire hummed low, while Eleanor Hayes rested in the chair Rowan had insisted she take, wrapped in a knitted blanket she kept trying to fold neatly instead of using. She had always been better at caring for others than accepting care herself. Since Matthew Hayes's outburst that morning, the town had begun to murmur. News traveled quickly in places with only one grocery store and a diner where everyone shared the same pot of morning coffee. Rowan noticed the shift instantly. Some glanced at him with suspicion, others with pity. And a few, mostly older folks, gave him a subtle nod of understanding. They were the ones who had known Harold Hayes. They remembered the quiet, steady man who had returned from war with a limp and a determination to live gently. But there were others, too, people who believed the loudest voice, not the truest one. And Matthew had been loud. Eleanor sensed Rowan's worry. "I'm sorry your holiday has become so tangled because of me," she murmured. "It's not tangled," Rowan said. "Just knotted. Knots can be undone." Blaze lifted his head suddenly, ears snapping forward. His muscles tightened in a ripple down his back. "What is it, boy?" Rowan asked. Blaze didn't bark, not yet, but his chest rumbled with a soft warning. He walked to the door, sat, then stared intently toward the road that wound from the cabin into town. Rowan felt the shift the same way he felt the tension in a rifle stock, instinctive, old, unfailing. He grabbed his coat. "Something's wrong." Eleanor rose too quickly. "Do you think—" "I don't think," he said. "Blaze does." They stepped out into the night, snow crunching underfoot like shattered shells. Blaze darted ahead, tail stiff, nose skimming the wind. Rowan jogged after him, keeping a pace he hadn't realized still lived in his legs. Eleanor followed more slowly but determined, clutching the coat Rowan had thrown over her shoulders. As the lights of town neared, Blaze broke into a sprint. "Blaze!" Rowan shouted, but the dog didn't slow. didn't dare. At the corner of Willow Bend Lane, Eleanor's house appeared, dimly lit, the porch light flickering from wind. But the front door wasn't closed. It hung open by a few inches, quivering each time the breeze sighed. Rowan's pulse sharpened. Blaze barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, and charged inside. Rowan followed, his silhouette filling the doorway like a protective shield. Eleanor arrived seconds later, breath ragged. The living room was a mess. Papers littered the floor. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied. The cabinet with the hidden compartment was open, its contents handled carelessly. Two men stood near the kitchen archway. One was Matthew Hayes, face strained, anger-fueled exhaustion carved into the tight lines around his mouth. The other was a stranger, a tall, lean man in his late 30s with neatly parted brown hair and thin wire-frame glasses. He wore a fitted charcoal coat, black slacks, and polished shoes despite the weather. His expression hovered between irritation and fear, but mostly arrogance. This was Jonas Billings, the real estate broker whose name had appeared on the earlier envelope. Matthew spun around. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Eleanor stepped forward, trembling. "The question is what you're doing in my house without permission." Matthew opened his mouth, but Blaze growled. Slow, methodical, his body lowering into a guarded stance. Billings lifted his hands. "Now, let's not overreact. We're simply looking for misplaced documents." "A misunderstanding, really?" Rowan laughed once, humorless. "Breaking into a senior's home is a hell of a misunderstanding." Billings straightened his posture, trying to reclaim control. "We had reason to believe the authorization forms were filed incorrectly. We came to retrieve—" "You mean forge?" Rowan interrupted, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Say that again for the camera." Billings paled. "You can't film—" "I can and I am," Rowan said, pointing the lens directly at him. Matthew stepped forward, face red. "Turn that off. You're twisting things." "No," Rowan replied. "You twisted them already." Eleanor reached for a chair to steady herself. "Matthew, how could you do this?" Matthew faltered. "Mom, I didn't want to. The taxes, the upkeep. Your house is falling apart. We can't keep doing this. You need real care." "But you didn't ask me," she whispered. "You never asked." Her voice cut through the room like a winter branch snapping. Neighbors appeared at the doorway next, an older woman with a snow-dusted shawl and a man in flannel pajamas under a heavy coat. They had seen Blaze sprinting and followed, curiosity turning into alarm. "What's all this?" the woman gasped. Rowan answered simply, "They broke in." Within minutes the police arrived. The officer who stepped inside was a thick-built man in his early 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and a winter uniform stretched across his broad shoulders. His nameplate read, Officer Franklin Moore. His reputation was solid, fair, steady, with 25 years on the force and a calm that could cool a riot. "What seems to be happening here?" Moore asked. Billings jumped in. "Officer, good evening. This is all a misunderstanding. We believed Mrs. Hayes had pre-approved—" "She didn't," Eleanor said, voice gaining strength. "And even if I had, you have no right to touch my things." Moore glanced at the scattered papers. "Breaking and entering is—" "Not a misunderstanding, Mr. Billings. Matthew Hayes, is this your mother's consent signature?" Matthew swallowed hard. "It's incomplete." "That's an interesting word for forgery," Moore replied. As Moore questioned the men, Blaze suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched toward the cabinet again, not the first hidden compartment, but the opposite side of the base. He approached slowly, sniffed deeply, and pawed twice at the wood. Rowan stared. "Again?" Eleanor hesitated. "Harold always said that cabinet was his keeper of memories. I thought he meant sentimentally." Moore stepped closer. "Ma'am, may we open it?" She nodded. Rowan worked his fingers along the bottom edge, pressing lightly until a faint click answered back. A second wooden panel shifted aside, revealing a narrow recess. Inside lay a sealed envelope, wrapped in aged twine. Eleanor took it gently, hands trembling as she unwrapped the cord. The letter inside bore Harold's handwriting, older, shakier this time. Last Will and Testament, Harold Hayes. To be honored regardless of circumstance, Rowan stepped back as she unfolded the document. Her eyes widened, her breath broke. It says, "The house remains mine for life," she whispered. "No one may sell or transfer it without my clear, willing consent." Moore nodded slowly. "This is legally binding, and recent enough to supersede any previous drafts." Billings swayed where he stood, color draining from his face. Matthew covered his mouth with one hand, as if sudden shame had struck him full force. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear. Billings told me. He said it was the best way, that we were helping you." "You never asked what I wanted," Eleanor said quietly. "Helping means listening, Matthew." Silence settled in the room, heavy as snowfall. Billings was escorted out. Matthew stayed only long enough to promise he would return another day, calmer, ready to talk, needing time to face the gravity of what he had done. When the last police car pulled away, Eleanor nearly collapsed into a chair. Relief washed through her in a shaking breath she'd been holding for years. Blaze patted over and rested his head gently on her lap, eyes soft, steady, warm. A guardian sealing peace. Rowan sat beside her. "You're safe, and that house stays yours." Eleanor stroked Blaze's ears, tears bright on her cheeks. "This dog, he sees everything we try to hide from ourselves." Blaze leaned into her touch as if accepting the unspoken praise and the responsibility that came with it. Outside, the wind finally quieted. Inside, truth had won its place, back in the home it never should have left. Snow drifted lazily across North Falls as twilight slipped into evening, leaving behind a sky brushed with faint purples and the glow of Christmas lights strung across Main Street. Rowan Mercer adjusted the collar of his old Marine Corps coat before stepping into the small Veterans Hall near the town square. Blaze walked beside him, tail low but relaxed, his black and tan fur gleaming under the outdoor lamps. The hall wasn't grand, but it had character. A weathered American flag on the back wall, framed photographs of soldiers from decades past, and rows of wooden tables covered in checkered red and white cloths. Tonight wasn't meant to be a grand event. It was simply a late Christmas dinner, one Rowan had decided to organize so Eleanor Hayes wouldn't face shame or whispers after the rumors stirred by her son and the broker. He wanted her to be surrounded by people who understood dignity, service, loyalty. Veterans knew those things better than most. Inside, the smell of roast chicken and cinnamon rolls filled the air. A few older veterans waved when Rowan walked in. They were men with faces lined from years of quiet endurance, some bearded, some bald, some walking with canes decorated in military decals. Beside them sat their spouses, women with soft smiles, warm shawls, and eyes full of memory. Eleanor entered moments later, wearing a simple blue wool coat and a small silver pin shaped like a dove, her late husband's gift from decades ago. She looked fragile but luminous, like someone stepping back into a world she had once belonged to but forgot how to navigate. "You look beautiful," Rowan said, pulling out a chair for her. Blaze settled at her feet, resting his chin across her shoe, as if claiming her as part of his watch. Eleanor laughed softly. "This dog treats me like royalty." "He treats everyone with good hearts that way," Rowan replied. "He knows people better than I do." Across the room, a tall, burly man with a salt-and-pepper beard approached. He moved slowly, favoring his right knee, and carried with him the air of someone who had lived through decades of quiet battles. This was Gilbert Crane, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, known in town for his gravelly laugh and his unwavering memory of names, dates, and battlefield maps. He extended his hand to Rowan. "Heard you're the Mercer kid," Crane said. "Didn't think I'd see that name again." Rowan tensed. "Yes, Rowan Mercer." Crane's eyes softened. "Your grandfather saved one of ours. Harold Hayes's squad was pinned down in '68. Mercer dragged 2 of them out under machine gun fire. One of them was Hayes himself." Eleanor turned slowly, lips parting in shock. Rowan blinked, unable to speak. Crane chuckled. "You didn't know? That story was legend." He placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder. "Your bloodline's full of stubborn heroes." This revelation settled into Rowan like a stone dropped into deep water. It explained the letter they had found, the note from Harold Hayes to Mercer. But hearing it from someone who had been there, someone who spoke of the 2 men with reverence, made the connection feel fated, almost sacred. Rehook. Blaze's strange stillness. Blaze, who had been dozing lightly at Eleanor's feet, suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked straight, eyes locked on Rowan with unusual intensity. Then he let out a single, low bark, not aggressive, not fearful, but alert, purposeful. Rowan paused mid-sentence. Eleanor glanced down. "Is something wrong?" Blaze stepped forward and pressed his forehead gently against Rowan's knee, a gesture the dog rarely used except when sensing emotional turmoil. The hall grew faintly quieter around them, as if the dog's action had brushed a strange ripple through the air. Rowan swallowed hard, aware the moment was somehow significant. Blaze felt something shifting inside him before he did. Crane raised a brow. "That animal's got the soul of a compass," he muttered. "Points people where they need to go." The moment hovered, fleeting but charged, before Rowan exhaled slowly and the evening resumed. Dinner began. Laughter rose. Stories flowed like rivers, finding paths through old stone. Veterans swapped tales from Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan. Stories told not for glory, but for understanding. They spoke of nights too quiet, comrades lost, jokes cracked in foxholes to keep nightmares at bay. Eleanor listened with wide, grateful eyes. She had lived through war behind the scenes, raising 3 children alone while her husband served and then helping him navigate the echoes of combat long after he came home. These men understood her loss in ways her children never had. Halfway through the meal, the doors opened. Matthew Hayes stepped inside. Behind him came his younger siblings. Clara Hayes, a woman in her early 40s with tightly curled dark hair and tired eyes, and Daniel Hayes, a man just past 30 with a lean frame and a jittery expression. They entered together but hesitantly, like people walking into a hospital waiting room, unsure whether they were there to deliver bad news or receive it. The room fell quiet. Rowan's jaw stiffened. Blaze rose silently, positioning himself beside Eleanor, not aggressive, simply present. Clara stepped forward first. She wore a long maroon coat, wrinkled from the drive, and held herself with the pride of someone used to taking charge. But tonight, her confidence faltered. "Mom," she said softly. Eleanor's breath caught, but she didn't speak. Daniel added, "We didn't know this was happening. Matthew said you might be here." Matthew stepped closer, eyes flicking toward Rowan, then Blaze, then the veteran's photos on the wall. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and there were faint strained lines around his mouth, the look of someone wrestling shame, but not yet surrendering. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "we wanted to talk and to apologize." Eleanor stared at him, at all 3 of them, and for once didn't shrink into apology herself. "You left me alone on Christmas Eve," she whispered, "and then you tried to take my home." Matthew winced. I know what it looks like, and I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "I just thought The house was too much for you. I thought you were lonely." "I was," she answered, "but not because of the house." Silence carried the weight of years of misunderstandings. Clara stepped closer and placed a hesitant hand on Eleanor's arm. She was shorter, a bit rounder in the face, with gentle eyes that filled instantly with tears. "Mom, I'm sorry. Truly, I don't know how we let work and rushing and life replace you." Her voice cracked. "You deserved better, especially on Christmas." Daniel nodded vigorously, his nervous energy dissolving into raw emotion. "We thought we were being practical, but we never asked what made you feel safe or loved." The veterans watched quietly, respectful of a family stitching itself back together. Rowan stepped aside, letting them have space. Blaze nudged Eleanor forward, encouraging her to stand, and she did, slowly, trembling, but stronger than she had been in years. She placed a hand on Clara's cheek, another on Daniel's. Then she turned to Matthew, who looked as though he expected her to turn her back instead. She reached for him, too. "That's enough apology," she said. "Come sit, eat. This is a night for peace." Matthew blinked through sudden tears. As the family settled at the table, Rowan watched something uncoil inside Eleanor. A lifetime of holding her breath finally exhaled. Across the table, Eleanor looked at Rowan and said softly, "See? Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom." He nodded, feeling her words burrow into the buried place where he kept thoughts of his own estranged son. The dinner grew warm again. Stories resumed. Laughter stitched lightly around the table. And for the first time in many years, Eleanor Hayes felt surrounded, not by obligation, but by belonging. The night didn't resolve everything. Broken pieces remained. Old hurts didn't vanish. But a door had opened, a small, fragile door of forgiveness. And Rowan knew. Sometimes that was enough to change the course of a life. A year passed quietly, as years often do in small northern towns. Winter returned with its soft hush, laying white across rooftops and bending pine branches with gentle weight. On the edge of North Falls, a warm glow shimmered through the falling snow, steady, inviting, like a lantern hung for travelers who had forgotten what home felt like. The glow came from a house that had once been an old, weary structure, but now stood transformed into something more. North Falls Lighthouse. The name wasn't literal. No lighthouse tower pierced the sky. Instead, the house itself had become a beacon, rebuilt, repainted, and reimagined by Rowan Mercer, Eleanor Hayes, and an array of volunteers who believed in second chances. The windows glowed golden each night, signaling refuge for anyone alone, forgotten, or simply wandering. Inside, the warmth was tangible. A long wooden table stretched across the main room, handmade by a retired carpenter who'd lost his wife 3 years prior. Quilts stitched by widows from the church lay folded across chairs. The fireplace crackled softly, and beside it, a large German shepherd rested with kingly composure. Blaze had become the soul of the place. He walked beside elderly veterans when their legs trembled. He sat at the bedside of men who fought nightmares. He let children curl against his flank when they were frightened of thunder. And somehow everyone believed Blaze personally remembered them, carried their burdens, and guarded their secrets. Rowan watched the dog move around the room with a mix of pride and wonder. Blaze was 6 now, aging into that prime where strength met wisdom. His amber-brown eyes held a depth that often startled visitors. "He knows," they would whisper. "He always knows." Rowan, now with a few more lines around his eyes and a more open posture than the man he'd been a year ago, had learned to agree. Eleanor Hayes, meanwhile, had reclaimed her home, not only as a place to live, but as a place to give. With her silver hair pinned neatly each morning, she bustled through the lighthouse with gentle authority. She checked blankets, brewed tea and coaxed shy newcomers into conversation with stories from her years as a mother, a wife, a caregiver. She had always been someone who gave everything she had. Now she did so for people who appreciated every ounce. The town, once divided by rumors, now embraced the project fully. Volunteers came weekly, neighbors dropped off food, holiday decorations were donated by the school. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all, Eleanor's children tried. They weren't perfect. Old patterns never dissolve entirely. But they came by more often. Clara brought flowers. Daniel brought board games. Even Matthew, changed by the humiliation of his own mistakes, carried casseroles and spent time repairing loose shingles. All three brought time, the one gift Eleanor had always wanted. One snowy morning a week before Christmas, Rowan stood outside the light, house-tightening bulbs on a string of warm lights. Blaze sat nearby, watching crows gather across the road, his tail flicking gently. The cold reddened Rowan's cheeks as he focused on a stubborn bulb. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. "Rowan, dear, you've been out in the cold long enough." "Almost done," he said, tightening his grip on the wire. "You said that 20 minutes ago." He glanced over his shoulder. "And I was honest then, too." She chuckled. Stubbornness must be hereditary. Rowan smirked before returning to his task. That was when Blaze stood abruptly, ears rising like two sharp triangles. "What is it now?" Rowan asked. But Blaze didn't move. He stared down the snowy road leading into town, a road empty just moments earlier. Something was coming. Eleanor followed his gaze. "Is someone—" "Probably a volunteer," Rowan said, but doubt edged his voice. The dog gave a short, deep bark, one Rowan hadn't heard in months. Not a warning, not distress, recognition, a sound like a memory returning home. Rehook. The man at the end of the road. A figure emerged through the swirling snow, a tall man in his late 20s, shoulders squared, chin tucked into the collar of his winter coat. His hair was dark like Rowan's once had been, though cut shorter, and his walk held a tension of someone uncertain about the welcome waiting for him. Rowan froze, the string of light slipping from his hand. Blaze bolted forward, bounding through the snow with bursts of pure joy. Eleanor whispered, breath trembling, "Rowan, is that—" "Yes," Rowan said, voice hollow with disbelief. "That's my son." His name was Caleb Mercer, and Rowan hadn't seen him in nearly 5 years. Once a firebrand of youth, quick to laugh, quicker to argue, Caleb had grown into a man with sharper edges. He had Rowan's tall frame, but carried himself differently, as though life had carved out deeper spaces behind his eyes. When Blaze reached him, the dog skidded to a stop and pressed his nose into Caleb's hand as if greeting a long-lost friend. Caleb knelt immediately, tugging off his glove, letting the warmth of Blaze's fur thaw the coldness around his fingers. "You must be Blaze," he murmured with a soft smile. "I've heard more about you than my own childhood." Rowan approached with slow, uncertain steps. Caleb rose, brushing snow from his coat. "Dad?" Rowan swallowed. You made it." "I read the article," Caleb said. "The one about this place, about you, about the dog who helped build it." His voice wavered slightly. "I didn't know how to call, didn't know if I should, but I kept thinking, maybe this year I should try." They stood only a foot apart, but separated by years of silence. Rowan's breath fogged the air between them. "I'm glad you did," Rowan said finally. "I should have tried sooner. I should have—" Caleb shook his head. "We both broke. Something. Maybe we can fix it now." There was no embrace yet, but something far more fragile and necessary passed between them. Permission. Inside, Eleanor saw it all from the window. Tears gathered in her eyes. "That boy came home," she whispered. "Oh, Harold, you'd be proud. That night, the lighthouse glowed brighter than ever. Volunteers filled the rooms. Elderly veterans sat beside teenagers who came to shovel snow. A single mother braided her daughter's hair by the fire. Clara and Daniel served soup. Matthew carefully carried a tray of warm bread. At the head of the table, Eleanor placed a candle in a glass jar. For those who were lost and those who found their way back. Rowan sat beside Caleb, uncertain but grateful. Blaze lay between them, head on his paws, eyes half closed as if claiming responsibility for the reunion. Over dinner, voices overlapped, stories rose and fell, and laughter wove itself through the rafters. No one asked who belonged to whom. No one questioned why certain people had shown up alone. Everyone belonged. Eleanor lifted her glass. To those who thought they were forgotten, she said, and to the moments that proved them wrong. Rowan met Caleb's gaze, a cautious but hopeful link. Caleb raised his glass in return. When the night settled into quiet, Rowan stepped outside. Snow drifted under the porch light, and the windows glowed behind him like a constellation of small suns. Caleb joined him silently. "Dad," he said, "I'm staying in North Falls for a while, if that's okay." The words hit Rowan with gentle force. "It's more than okay." Blaze nudged Caleb's hand again, tail sweeping the porch. Rowan breathed in the cold air, feeling the soft ache of something mending inside him. The light shining from North Falls Lighthouse no longer felt borrowed, or forced, or fragile. It was built from loneliness turned into welcome, from wounds turned into bridges, from strangers turned into family. It was the light of people who had lost each other and found each other again. And it was here to stay. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not the ones that split the sky, but the quiet moments when two people who once drifted apart find their way back to the same table. In the soft glow of North Falls Lighthouse, we see a reminder that God still works through ordinary days, through a warm meal, a returned knock on the door, a loyal dog who leads us where our hearts are afraid to go. If this story touched something in you, let it be this. No matter how lost we feel, grace has a way of reaching us. Sometimes it arrives in the shape of a friend, a stranger, or a moment we never expected. And sometimes, if we are willing to look closely, it arrives exactly when we need it most. If this message speaks to your heart, please share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. May the Lord watch over you and everyone you love, and may His light guide you gently through every season ahead.